Growing up as the other twin taught me that sometimes the biggest gift your family can give you is showing you exactly who you don't want to become. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and this is the story of how my parents' favoritism toward my twin sister became the fuel that launched me to the top of the very company they always dreamed of owning. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first memory I have of understanding I was different happened when I was 7 years old. My twin sister Charlotte and I were standing in our kitchen in suburban Phoenix, both covered in finger paint from an art project. Charlotte had painted what looked like a rainbow explosion across 3 sheets of paper, while I had carefully created a detailed cityscape with tiny buildings and even tinier people walking between them. Mom walked in, took one look at Charlotte's colorful chaos, and immediately started gushing. "Oh, honey, look at this masterpiece. You're such a creative genius." She scooped Charlotte up and spun her around while Dad rushed over with the camera. They spent the next 10 minutes photographing Charlotte's painting from every angle, talking about how they needed to frame it and show it to Grandma. My cityscape sat untouched on the counter. When I finally worked up the courage to tap Mom's arm and point to my painting, she glanced over with a distracted smile. "That's very nice, Rebecca. Very neat." Then she turned back to Charlotte, who was already starting her next masterpiece. That word, neat, would haunt me for years. While Charlotte was creative, brilliant, and extraordinary, I was neat, organized, practical. The boring twin. Our house in the Camelback East neighborhood was filled with Charlotte's artwork, her piano recital programs, and photos of her winning various school competitions. My perfect report cards were briefly acknowledged before being filed away in a folder somewhere. Charlotte's B- grades were celebrated as evidence of her artistic temperament. "Artists don't need perfect grades," Dad would say, ruffling Charlotte's curly auburn hair that perfectly matched Mom's. "They need passion and creativity." My straight brown hair and methodical nature apparently needed nothing but tolerance. The difference became even more pronounced when we started high school at Phoenix Country Day School. Charlotte immediately gravitated toward theater and art classes, while I found myself drawn to business and economics. She starred in the school musical. I balanced the drama club's budget and organized their fundraising campaigns. Our parents attended every single one of Charlotte's performances, sometimes driving across the state when she bought roles in community theater productions. When I made it to the state finals for the Future Business Leaders of America competition, they said they couldn't make it because Charlotte had a dress rehearsal the same day. I won first place. Charlotte's dress rehearsal was for a production that wouldn't open for another month. The summer before our senior year, everything changed in a way that would shape the next decade of my life. Dad came home from work with an unusual excitement in his voice. He had been working as a regional manager for a large logistics company, and Mom taught elementary school, but they both had always harbored dreams of starting their own business. "I found it," Dad announced over dinner, spreading papers across our kitchen table. "The perfect opportunity. There's this small supply chain management company called Southwest Logistics Solutions that's going up for sale. The owner is retiring, and he's looking for someone to take over." Mom leaned over the documents, her eyes bright with possibility. "How much would we need?" "That's the thing," Dad continued, his voice getting more animated. "It's not just about the money. The current owner, Frank Williamson, wants to make sure his company goes to someone who really understands the business, someone with vision and drive." For the next 2 hours, they pored over the business plan, talking about revenue projections and growth potential. Southwest Logistics Solutions specialized in helping medium-sized businesses optimize their supply chains, reducing costs, improving efficiency, and connecting companies with reliable vendors. "This could be it," Mom whispered, "our chance to build something real." I found myself leaning in, asking questions about their client base and market position. The numbers fascinated me. SLS had steady contracts with over 200 companies throughout Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, but their systems were outdated and their processes inefficient. With some strategic improvements, the revenue potential was enormous. Charlotte, meanwhile, was scrolling through her phone, occasionally sighing loudly to express her boredom with the conversation. "What do you think, girls?" Dad asked, though his eyes lingered on Charlotte. "Sounds complicated," Charlotte said without looking up, "but if it makes you happy, go for it." I, on the other hand, had already started mentally reorganizing their client database and identifying opportunities for expansion. Have you looked into their accounts receivable turnover? And what about their vendor payment terms? If you could negotiate better rates with suppliers, you could offer more competitive pricing to clients while maintaining margins.
Dad blinked in surprise. That's actually a really good point. But before the conversation could continue, Charlotte's phone rang, her boyfriend calling, and suddenly all attention shifted to whether she should go to the movies or stay home. The business opportunity dominated dinner conversations for weeks. Dad would come home with new information about Southwest Logistics Solutions, and I would pepper him with questions about their operational efficiency and growth strategies. I started researching their competitors, analyzing market trends, and even creating spreadsheets to help my parents understand the financial implications of different expansion scenarios. Charlotte would usually excuse herself from these discussions to practice piano or work on college applications. One evening in late July, Dad came home with news that would change everything. Frank Williamson wants to meet with us. He's invited our whole family to dinner at his house next Saturday. "Why the whole family?" Mom asked. "He believes in family businesses, says he wants to get a sense of whether we're the kind of people who can carry on his legacy." That Saturday, we drove to Frank Williamson's sprawling ranch house in Scottsdale. Frank was a weathered man in his 70s, with sharp blue eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades building his business from nothing. Over barbecue and sweet tea, Frank told us about starting Southwest Logistics Solutions 35 years earlier with nothing but a pickup truck and a phone book. He said, "I called every business in Phoenix until someone gave me a chance to prove I could save them money. Took me 6 months to land my first real client, but once I did, word spread." He asked Dad about his experience in logistics. Nodded approvingly at Mom's background in education. He said, "Good teachers make good business owners," and then turned his attention to Charlotte and me. "So, what do you girls plan to do with your lives?" Charlotte launched into her dreams of studying theater at UCLA, her plans to move to Los Angeles and pursue acting. Frank listened politely, asking thoughtful questions about her goals and experiences. When he turned to me, I felt my parents tense slightly, as if warning me not to say anything too boring or practical. "I'm interested in business," I said simply, "specifically supply chain optimization and market expansion strategies." Frank's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? What got you interested in that?" I explained how I had been researching his company and the broader logistics industry. I told him about the inefficiencies I'd identified in current market approaches and the opportunities I saw for companies that could innovate their service models. Frank listened intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed he was taking my answers seriously. By the end of the evening, he and I had spent nearly an hour discussing industry trends and potential strategies for growing Southwest Logistics Solutions. As we prepared to leave, Frank shook hands with each of us. When he got to me, he held my hand a moment longer than necessary. "You've got a good head for business, Rebecca. Don't let anyone tell you that's not valuable." The drive home was quiet. Charlotte fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from performing charm for 3 hours. In the front seat, my parents whispered about their chances of securing the deal. "I think he liked us," Mom said hopefully. "He certainly seemed impressed with Charlotte. She was so engaging and articulate." I stared out the window at the desert landscape passing by, Frank's words echoing in my mind. For the first time in my life, someone had recognized value in the way I thought, in the questions I asked, in the solutions I saw. 3 weeks later, Frank Williamson called with devastating news. Despite weeks of negotiations and multiple meetings, he had decided not to sell Southwest Logistics Solutions to my parents. The financing had fallen through, he explained, and he'd decided to keep running the company for a few more years. Mom cried that night. Dad sat at the kitchen table staring at the business plans they'd spent months perfecting. Their dream of entrepreneurship evaporated in a single phone call. "Maybe it's for the best," Charlotte said, trying to be supportive. You both have good jobs. Why rock the boat? But I could see the disappointment in my parents' eyes. They had tasted possibility, and losing it left them hollow.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That night, lying in my twin bed across from Charlotte's, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would find a way to make their dream come true. Someday, I would prove that being practical and organized and methodical wasn't just neat, it was powerful. I just had no idea how long that someday would take to arrive. The aftermath of my parents' failed business venture hung over our house like a permanent cloud. Dad would come home from his regional manager job at the logistics company and sit at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop with the same defeated expression he'd worn since Frank Williamson's rejection call. Mom threw herself into her elementary school teaching with an intensity that felt desperate, as if perfect lesson plans could somehow fill the void where their entrepreneurial dreams used to live. Charlotte seemed oblivious to the shift in family dynamics. She was too busy preparing for her senior year theater auditions and planning her escape to UCLA. Every conversation revolved around her upcoming performances, her college applications, and the bright future that awaited her in Hollywood. Meanwhile, I found myself becoming obsessed with understanding exactly why my parents' business plan had failed. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, I would sneak into Dad's home office and study the Southwest Logistics Solutions documents he'd left scattered across his desk. The more I learned about the logistics industry, the more fascinated I became. Supply chain management wasn't just about moving boxes from point A to point B. It was about optimizing complex systems, reducing inefficiencies, and creating competitive advantages for businesses that depended on reliable transportation. I started researching other logistics companies in Arizona, studying their service offerings, and trying to understand what separated successful operations from struggling ones. I discovered that the industry was dominated by massive national corporations and tiny local companies, with very few mid-sized regional players like Southwest Logistics Solutions. That gap in the market represented an opportunity, and I couldn't stop thinking about how someone could exploit it. Senior year began with Charlotte already mentally checked out of high school and me diving deeper into business and economics courses. While she spent her free time memorizing monologues and practicing songs for college auditions, I was reading industry publications and teaching myself about corporate finance. My fascination with business didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Sandra Martinez, no relation despite sharing my last name, taught advanced placement economics and had a reputation for pushing students beyond standard curriculum requirements. "Rebecca," she said after class one October afternoon, "I've been watching your engagement with supply chain economics, and I think you might be interested in something extracurricular." "What kind of something?" "There's a statewide competition called Future Business Leaders Challenge. Teams of students create comprehensive business plans for real companies facing strategic decisions. This year's case study involves a mid-sized logistics company that's considering geographic expansion." My heart started racing. "When is the competition?" "Applications are due next month. The preliminary round is in January and finals are in March. But, Rebecca, this isn't a casual commitment. Winning teams typically spend 4 to 5 hours per week researching and developing their proposals." I didn't hesitate. "I want to do it." Mrs. Martinez smiled. "I hoped you'd say that, but you'll need teammates. The competition requires 3-person teams." Finding teammates proved more challenging than I anticipated. Most of my classmates were focused on college applications and weren't interested in committing to an intensive business competition. Finally, I recruited Jessica Chen, a brilliant student from my calculus class, and David Rodriguez, whose family owned a small restaurant and understood business operations.
Our case study company was Southwestern Express Logistics, a mid-sized firm based in Tucson that was considering expansion into New Mexico and Nevada markets. We had 6 weeks to analyze their financial position, assess market opportunities, and develop a comprehensive expansion strategy. I threw myself into the project with an intensity that surprised even me. Every afternoon after school, our team would meet in the library to research market conditions, analyze competitor strategies, and model financial projections. I contacted professors at Arizona State University to better understand logistics industry trends. I even called companies in Albuquerque and Las Vegas to gather information about local market conditions. Jessica and David initially seemed overwhelmed by my research intensity, but they quickly caught my enthusiasm. Jessica's mathematical skills proved invaluable for financial modeling, while David's practical business experience helped us understand operational challenges. Rebecca, you realize you know more about the logistics industry than most college business majors, right?
I just find it interesting. This goes beyond interesting. You talk about supply chain optimization like other people talk about their favorite movies. She wasn't wrong. I had become genuinely passionate about the strategic challenges facing logistics companies. Every article I read, every case study I analyzed, every financial model I built deepened my understanding of an industry that most people considered boring, but that I found endlessly fascinating. The preliminary competition took place at Phoenix Convention Center on a Saturday in January. 27 teams from across Arizona presented their business plans to panels of judges that included actual business executives and university professors. Our presentation went flawlessly. Jessica handled the financial projections with mathematical precision, David explained operational implementation with practical clarity, and I tied everything together with strategic analysis that impressed even myself. When the results were announced that afternoon, Camelback High School had placed first in the state competition and earned the right to compete at nationals in Atlanta. The victory celebration at our school was modest, a brief announcement during Monday morning's daily bulletin, and congratulations for Mrs. Martinez. Charlotte, meanwhile, had just been accepted to UCLA's theater program and was being celebrated with a family dinner at her favorite restaurant. The contrast didn't sting the way it might have 6 months earlier. I was beginning to understand that my achievements didn't need external validation to be meaningful. The satisfaction I felt from solving complex business problems was reward enough. Preparing for the national competition required even more intensive research. The case study for nationals involved a logistics company considering international expansion, a challenge that required understanding customs regulations, currency exchange risks, and global supply chain management. I spent spring break in the ASU library instead of going on vacation with friends. While Charlotte was visiting UCLA and preparing for her Hollywood future, I was reading academic papers about international trade logistics and studying successful expansion strategies used by companies like FedEx and UPS. The depth of knowledge I was developing went well beyond what any high school student typically learned about business. I was essentially giving myself a college-level education in logistics management, driven purely by intellectual curiosity and competitive determination. Jessica and David remained committed teammates, but they increasingly looked to me for strategic direction. I had become the unofficial leader of our team, not because I demanded control, but because I consistently had the most comprehensive understanding of the challenges we were addressing. "You know what's weird?" David said during one of our final preparation sessions. "6 months ago, I thought business was just about making money. But watching you break down these logistics problems has shown me that business is really about solving puzzles that affect real people's lives." He was right. Every efficiency we identified in our expansion plan would translate to lower costs for businesses that depended on shipping services. Every operational improvement we proposed would create job opportunities in new markets. Every strategic recommendation we made had real-world implications for companies and communities. The national competition in Atlanta was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Teams from across the country presented business plans that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of corporate strategy, financial analysis, and market dynamics. The judges included CEOs, venture capitalists, and business school professors who asked challenging questions that tested both our knowledge
and our ability to think quickly under pressure. Our presentation was scheduled for Saturday morning. I had practiced our 15-minute presentation so many times that I could deliver it flawlessly, even while nervous. Jessica and David were equally prepared, and our financial models were more detailed than most college-level teams. But what set us apart wasn't just our preparation. It was the genuine passion I brought to discussing logistics industry challenges. When judges asked follow-up questions about regulatory compliance or competitive positioning, I answered with insights that reflected months of intensive study. "Where did you learn so much about international shipping regulations?" one judge asked after our presentation. "Independent research. I've been studying the logistics industry for about 8 months now." "Are you planning to study business in college?" "Yes, with a focus on supply chain management and operations." The judge made a note on his evaluation sheet. "Well, you're clearly already ahead of most college sophomores in understanding industry dynamics." Results weren't announced until Sunday afternoon. 27 teams had been narrowed down to 5 finalists, and we were among them. But when they announced the national champion, I heard Camelback High School and felt a rush of accomplishment, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. We had won the National Future Business Leaders Challenge. The trophy ceremony was followed by a reception where judges and business executives mingled with student competitors. I found myself in conversations with logistics industry professionals who were genuinely impressed by our team's strategic analysis. "Have you considered internships in the logistics field?" asked Margaret Foster, a vice president at a Phoenix-based shipping company. "We're always looking for bright students who understand our industry." "I'd be very interested in learning about opportunities." "Give me your contact information. I'll put you in touch with our human resources director." The flight home from Atlanta was surreal. Jessica and David were excited about adding the national championship to their college applications, but for me, the competition had clarified something much more important than academic achievement. I wanted to work in the logistics industry, not just as a job or career path, but as the focus of my professional life. The problems were complex, the solutions required creativity and analytical thinking, and successful companies in this space could have tremendous positive impact on the broader economy. More importantly, I was good at it. Not just competent or adequate, but genuinely talented at understanding logistics challenges and developing strategic solutions. The recognition ceremony at our high school was more substantial this time. The principal made an announcement during a school assembly, and our trophy was displayed in the main office showcase. Local news stations ran brief segments about our national championship. My parents attended the school recognition ceremony and seemed genuinely proud of our achievement. But their enthusiasm was tempered by ongoing disappointment about their own failed business venture. Watching their daughter succeed in business analysis only seemed to highlight their own perceived failures. "You did amazing work on this project," Dad said as we drove home from the ceremony. "Your understanding of logistics strategy is really impressive." "Thanks. I've been thinking about majoring in supply chain management when I start college." "That's a practical choice. The logistics industry will always need smart people." There was that word again. Practical. But this time, it didn't feel dismissive. It felt like recognition that my methodical approach to problem solving had real value in the business world. Charlotte's reaction to our national championship was typically supportive but distracted. She was deep into UCLA preparation and couldn't focus on anything that didn't relate to her upcoming transition to Los Angeles. "That's so cool, Becca. You're going to be like a business executive or something." "Maybe. I'm thinking about starting my own logistics company someday." Charlotte looked up from her UCLA orientation materials. "Seriously? Your own company?" "Why not? I understand the industry better than most people twice my age. I know what clients need and what companies are doing wrong. Starting a business just means putting that knowledge to work." For the first time in months, Charlotte gave me her full attention. "You really think you could do that?" "I don't see why not. It would take time to gain experience and build capital, but the opportunity is definitely there." She stared at me for a long moment. You know what? I believe you could. You've always been the one who figures out how to make things work. High school graduation arrived in May, with Charlotte and me heading in completely different directions. She was bound for UCLA and the entertainment industry, while I had accepted a full academic scholarship to Arizona State University's business program. The graduation ceremony itself was forgettable, but the conversation I had with my parents afterward would stick with me for years. "We're proud of both of you," Mom said as we posed for family photos. "Charlotte for pursuing her dreams in Los Angeles, and Rebecca for your academic achievements and business success. What are your plans for college? Are you still thinking about supply chain management?" "Definitely. And I want to get internship experience in the logistics industry as soon as possible." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "You know, watching you work on that business competition made me realize something. You have natural instincts for business strategy that took me years to develop." "What do you mean?" "The way you analyzed market opportunities and competitive positioning reminded me of the best executives I've worked with. You think systematically about complex problems in ways that most people never learn." It was the most meaningful compliment my father had ever given me about my academic work. But more importantly, it was recognition that my business interests weren't just a hobby or phase, they were a legitimate foundation for my future career. As summer began and Charlotte prepared for her move to California, I started planning for a college experience that would be completely different from traditional student life. I wasn't just going to study business, I was going to immerse myself in the logistics industry through internships, research projects, and practical experience. The boring practical twin was about to discover that methodical thinking and strategic analysis were exactly the skills needed to succeed in the competitive world of business. I just had no idea how quickly that discovery would lead to opportunities beyond anything I had imagined. The next 24 hours were a blur of research, calculations, and growing panic. I sat in the ASU library until 3 in the morning, surrounded by business valuation textbooks and my laptop screen filled with financing options that all seemed designed for people with established credit histories and substantial collateral. Traditional bank loans required personal guarantees I couldn't provide. SBA loans demanded extensive business experience I didn't have. Angel investors wanted proven track records and detailed exit strategies. Every path I explored led to the same dead end. I was too young, too inexperienced, and too broke to buy a multi-million-dollar company. But giving up wasn't an option. Not when I could see so clearly how dynamic distribution solutions could be improved, expanded, and transformed into something even more successful than Marcus had built. On day 3 of my 30-day countdown, I made a decision that would either launch my career or destroy it completely. I called Frank Williamson. It took me 2 hours to work up the courage to dial his number, which I'd kept stored in my phone since that dinner at his house 3 years ago. When he answered, his voice was exactly as I remembered. Gravelly, but warm. "Frank Williamson speaking?" "Mr. Williamson, this is Rebecca Martinez. You probably don't remember me, but you had dinner with my family a few years ago when my parents were interested in buying Southwest Logistics Solutions." There was a pause. "Rebecca, the young lady with all the smart questions about supply chain optimization. Of course I remember you. How are you doing?" The fact that he remembered me gave me courage to continue. "I'm calling because I need advice from someone who understands the logistics business. I have an opportunity to purchase the company where I work, but I'm facing some challenges with financing." "What kind of company?" I spent the next 20 minutes explaining dynamic distribution solutions, its business model, financial performance, and growth potential. Frank asked detailed questions about revenue streams, profit margins, and competitive positioning, questions I could answer confidently thanks to my 3 years of working there. "Sounds like a solid operation," he said when I finished. "What's the asking price?" $2.8 million. Frank whistled softly.
That's a significant investment for someone your age. What kind of financing are you looking at? That's where I'm stuck. Traditional lenders won't take me seriously, and I don't have the collateral for conventional business loans. Have you considered bringing in partners, other investors who could provide both capital and business experience? The idea hadn't occurred to me, mainly because I couldn't imagine anyone wanting to partner with a 20-year-old college student. But Frank's suggestion planted a seed that would grow into something much larger. I wouldn't even know where to start looking for partners. Well, Frank said thoughtfully, it just so happens that I know several successful business owners who are always looking for good investment opportunities. Would you be interested in putting together a formal presentation? My heart started racing. You'd help me connect with potential investors? I'd be willing to take a look at your business plan first. If it's as solid as you make it sound, I might be able to make some introductions. That phone call changed everything. Suddenly, I had a mentor, someone who believed my age wasn't automatically disqualifying and who understood the logistics industry well enough to evaluate my ideas seriously. Over the next week, I worked 18-hour days crafting the most comprehensive business plan I'd ever attempted. I analyzed every aspect of dynamic distribution solutions operations, identified specific opportunities for growth, and projected revenue increases based on strategic improvements I'd already mapped out. The plan I submitted to Frank was 43 pages of detailed financial analysis, market research, and operational strategies. I proposed expanding into new geographic markets, implementing advanced route optimization software, and developing specialized services for e-commerce businesses. Frank called me 3 days later with news that made my hands shake. I've reviewed your business plan, and I'm impressed. I'd like you to present it to a group of investors I work with. They meet monthly to evaluate potential opportunities. What kind of investors? Successful business owners, mostly retired or semi-retired, who have capital to invest in promising ventures. They're not just looking for financial returns, they want to support entrepreneurs who remind them of their younger selves. The presentation was scheduled for the following Thursday at Frank's office. I had 9 days to prepare for the most important meeting of my life. I practiced my presentation obsessively, timing every section and preparing answers for every possible question. I researched each potential investor Frank had mentioned, learning about their business backgrounds and investment preferences. I even bought my first professional suit, a navy blue ensemble that made me look older and more serious than my 20 years. The night before the presentation, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through scenarios in my mind, imagining everything that could go wrong. What if they laughed at me? What if my financial projections were too optimistic? What if they saw right through my confidence and realized I was just a scared college student pretending to be a businesswoman? At 5 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and drove to campus to practice my presentation one final time in an empty classroom. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my nervous energy perfectly. I arrived at Frank's office 30 minutes early, my presentation materials organized in a leather portfolio I'd borrowed from my business ethics professor. The conference room gradually filled with 6 investors, all men in their 50s and 60s who looked like they'd spent decades building and running successful companies. Frank introduced me simply as a young entrepreneur with an interesting opportunity. For the first few minutes, I could feel their skepticism. They were polite but distant, clearly wondering why they were listening to someone who looked like she should be asking for internship advice, not investment capital. But as I began presenting my analysis of dynamic distribution solutions, something shifted in the room. My voice grew stronger as I explained the company's competitive advantages and growth potential. I walked them through detailed financial projections, market analysis, and operational improvements that could increase revenue by 30% within 2 years. When I finished the formal presentation, the questions came fast and challenging. What makes you think you can manage a company with 47 employees when you've never supervised anyone? How do you plan to handle cash flow challenges during your first year of ownership? What happens if key clients decide they don't want to work with such a young CEO?
I answered every question with specific examples from my experience at Dynamic Distribution Solutions. I explained how I'd already been managing major client relationships, how my route optimization suggestions had improved operational efficiency, and how my youth could actually be an advantage in attracting younger, tech-savvy businesses. The room grew quieter as the questions continued. I could see the investors exchanging glances, their initial skepticism gradually being replaced by something that looked like genuine interest. After an hour of intense questioning, Frank asked me to step outside while the investors discussed my proposal privately. I spent 25 minutes pacing the hallway, alternating between confidence and terror. Through the conference room's glass door, I could see animated discussions, gesturing, and what looked like serious consideration of my materials. When Frank finally called me back in, his expression was unreadable. "Rebecca," he began, "we've discussed your proposal extensively. Your business plan is thorough, your market analysis is sound, and your operational knowledge is impressive." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "However," he continued, "we have some concerns about the risks involved in backing such a young entrepreneur in such a significant acquisition." My heart sank. This was it, the polite rejection I'd been expecting all along.
"Which is why," Frank continued with a slight smile, "we're prepared to make you an offer, but with conditions." I held my breath. "We're willing to provide the financing you need to purchase Dynamic Distribution Solutions. In exchange, we'd want a 40% equity stake in the company and the right to appoint 2 board members who would provide oversight and mentorship during your first 3 years as CEO. The numbers swirled in my head. 60% ownership of a multi-million-dollar company. Real financing. Actual mentorship from successful business owners. "There's one more condition," Frank added. "We want you to complete your degree. You can run the company while finishing school, but we need to see that commitment to your education." I looked around the room at 6 successful businessmen who were willing to bet nearly $3 million on a 20-year-old college student with a dream. "I accept," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The handshakes and congratulations that followed felt surreal. I had done it, found a way to buy the company that had taught me everything about business. But as I drove home that evening, one thought kept running through my mind. I couldn't wait to call Marcus and tell him the impossible had just become possible. More importantly, I realized I couldn't wait to prove that the boring, practical twin had just accomplished something extraordinary. The call to Marcus was even more surreal than the investor meeting. I sat in my car outside Frank's office building, hands still trembling from adrenaline, and dialed the number I knew by heart. "Rebecca, how did your mysterious project go?" Marcus asked, and I could hear his smile in his voice. "I have financing," I said simply. "I can make you an offer to buy Dynamic Distribution Solutions." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Rebecca, what are you talking about?" I explained everything. The investor group, the business plan, the 40% equity partnership. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for another long moment. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious. I can have a formal offer ready by tomorrow morning." "Rebecca, I need to think about this. Can we meet tomorrow afternoon? I want to discuss the details face to face." That night I barely slept. My mind raced through scenarios, contingency plans, and the massive responsibility I was about to take on. By morning, I had drafted a purchase agreement with help from Frank's business attorney, outlining terms that would allow Marcus to maintain a consulting role during the transition while giving me full operational control. The meeting with Marcus took place at 4 o'clock the next day. He looked exhausted, like he'd spent the night wrestling with a decision he never expected to face. "I've been thinking about your offer, and I have to ask you something directly.
Why do you want this? Really? You could graduate, get hired by any major corporation, work your way up the traditional ladder. Why risk everything on something this big? I thought about Charlotte's effortless charm, my parents' unwavering faith in her potential, and all the years I'd spent being the practical, reliable, unremarkable twin. But that wasn't the real answer. I said, because I see what this company could become. You built something incredible, but you're ready to move on. A corporate buyer will strip out everything that makes DDS special: the personal relationships, the innovative solutions, the willingness to take on challenging clients that bigger companies won't touch. I want to preserve that foundation and build something even better on top of it. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face. You know there's a difference between understanding a business and running one, right? I've been doing this for 8 years, and there are still days when I have no idea what I'm doing. I know. That's why I negotiated for mentorship as part of my investor agreement. I'm not naive enough to think I can do this alone. What about your family? What do they think about this crazy plan? I realized with a jolt that I hadn't told my parents anything about the acquisition. They knew I worked at a logistics company, but they had no idea I was about to become its owner. They don't know yet, I admitted. I wanted to have everything finalized before I told them. Well, I guess that's between you and them. As for the business, he pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been reviewing your offer with my attorney. The terms are fair, more than fair, actually. And frankly, I like the idea of DDS staying independent rather than being absorbed by some faceless corporation. My heart started racing. Does that mean... It means I'm accepting your offer. Congratulations, Rebecca. You're about to become the youngest CEO in the Arizona logistics industry. The handshake that sealed the deal felt like stepping through a doorway into a completely different life. Suddenly, I wasn't just Rebecca Martinez, college student with a part-time job. I was Rebecca Martinez, CEO of Dynamic Distribution Solutions. The legal process took 6 weeks to complete. During that time, I maintained my course load at ASU while working with attorneys, accountants, and my investor partners to finalize the acquisition. Marcus began transitioning his responsibilities to me gradually, starting with client meetings and strategic planning sessions. The hardest part wasn't the legal complexity or the financial pressure. It was keeping the secret from my family. Every time my parents asked about school or work, I had to bite my tongue to keep from blurting out the truth. Charlotte, meanwhile, had finally landed a recurring role on a web series and was calling home regularly with updates about her breakthrough moment. She's finally getting the recognition she deserves, Mom gushed during one of our family dinners. We always knew she had that special something. I nodded and smiled, pushing food around my plate while internally preparing for the conversation that would change everything. The closing day arrived on Tuesday in March. I signed my name to more documents than I'd ever seen in one place, officially becoming the majority owner of a company worth nearly $3 million. Frank and 2 other investors joined the board of directors, and Marcus transitioned to a 6-month consulting contract that would help ensure continuity for clients and employees. That evening, I drove home with a leather folder containing contracts, keys, and the weight of 47 employees' livelihoods on my shoulders. My parents were in the kitchen preparing dinner when I walked in, and Charlotte was visiting for spring break. "How was work today, honey?" Mom asked without looking up from the stove. "Actually, I need to talk to all of you about something important." The serious tone in my voice made everyone stop what they were doing. Dad turned off the television, Charlotte looked up from her phone, and Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel before giving me her full attention. "I have some news," I began, my heart pounding. "Today, I completed the purchase of Dynamic Distribution Solutions. I'm now the CEO of the company where I've been working."
The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte's mouth fell open. Dad blinked repeatedly like he was trying to process information that didn't compute. Mom sank into a kitchen chair. "I'm sorry. What?" Charlotte said finally. I bought the logistics company where I work. As of today, I own 60% of Dynamic Distribution Solutions. How much did this company cost? Dad asked, his voice strangely calm. $2.8 million. Mom made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. Rebecca, where did you get $2.8 million? I explained the investor partnership, the business plan, and the 6-month process that had led to this moment. My family listened in stunned silence as I described my new role, the company's growth potential, and my plans for expansion. When I finished, the kitchen remained quiet for what felt like an eternity. You bought a company, Charlotte said slowly, and you didn't tell us? I wanted to make sure everything was finalized before I said anything. I didn't want to get everyone excited about something that might not happen. Excited? Mom's voice was rising. Rebecca, you're 20 years old. You should be focused on finishing college, not taking on this kind of responsibility. I am finishing college. That was one of the conditions of the investment agreement. Dad cleared his throat. What exactly does this company do? I launched into an explanation of supply chain management, last-mile delivery optimization, and the specific services DDS provided to its 237 active clients. As I talked, I could see my parents' expressions shifting from shock to confusion to something that might have been pride. So, you're saying, Dad said carefully, that you own a successful business in the logistics industry. Yes. The same industry we wanted to get into when we looked at Southwest Logistics Solutions? Yes. Charlotte was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Wait, you remember that? You were, 17 when Mom and Dad were talking about buying that other company? I remember everything about it. I remember how excited you both were about the possibility of owning your own business. I remember how disappointed you were when the deal fell through. Mom's eyes were getting watery. Rebecca, honey, this is incredible, but are you sure you're ready for this kind of responsibility? For the first time in the conversation, I smiled. I've been preparing for this my entire life. Every business class, every hour at my internship, every conversation I had with Frank Williamson about industry trends, it was all leading to this moment. Frank Williamson? Dad sat up straighter. You've been talking to Frank? He's one of my investors. He's also become a mentor. When I called him for advice about financing, he connected me with other business owners who are willing to back my plan. The conversation continued for 2 more hours. My parents peppered me with questions about cash flow, employee management, and long-term strategy. Charlotte mostly listened, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. When I finished, Mom set down the dish she was holding and looked between Charlotte and me. We need to have a much longer conversation about this, but right now, I want to say something to Rebecca. She turned to face me directly. I am incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. Not just buying this company, but having the vision and determination to make it happen. You saw an opportunity, created a plan, and executed it flawlessly. That takes courage and intelligence and maturity far beyond your years. Dad nodded emphatically. Your mother's right. This is extraordinary, Rebecca. We should have been supporting your business interests more actively all along. Standing in my childhood kitchen, surrounded by my family, and finally receiving the recognition I'd craved for so long, I felt something shift inside me. The validation was wonderful, but I realized I no longer needed it the way I once had. I had bought the company for myself, to prove my own capabilities and build something meaningful. My parents' approval was a bonus, not the goal. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. But now I need to figure out how to actually run this thing. Charlotte laughed, and the sound broke the remaining tension in the room. Well, if anyone can figure it out, it's you. You've been planning this your whole life, even when you didn't know it. She was right. Every spreadsheet I'd created, every process I'd optimized, every problem I'd solved had been preparation for this moment. Now I just had to prove that the practical, methodical, supposedly boring twin could build something extraordinary. The first day as official CEO of Dynamic Distribution Solutions began at 5:30 in the morning with a panicked phone call from our night shift supervisor. A major client's emergency shipment had been delayed due to a truck breakdown, and they needed their medical supplies delivered to hospitals across 3 states before noon. I was still in my pajamas when I answered the phone, but within 20 minutes I was dressed and driving to our distribution center.
The adrenaline of crisis management felt familiar. I'd been handling operational emergencies as Marcus's operations coordinator for months, but knowing that the ultimate responsibility now rested on my shoulders added a weight I hadn't anticipated.
By 7 a.m., I had coordinated backup vehicles, rerouted drivers, and personally called the client to explain our contingency plan. The shipment reached all destinations on schedule, but the incident drove home a crucial reality. Being CEO meant being the person everyone turned to when things went wrong. The adjustment period was brutal. Marcus had warned me about the loneliness of leadership, but I hadn't truly understood what he meant until I found myself making decisions that affected people's paychecks, career prospects, and professional futures. Every choice felt magnified, every mistake potentially catastrophic. My first major challenge came 3 weeks into my tenure as CEO. Patricia Valdez, our longtime operations manager and Marcus's most trusted employee, requested a private meeting. Patricia had been with DDS since its second year of operation and commanded respect from every employee in the company. "Rebecca," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I need to be direct with you about something. There's been talk among the staff about your age and experience level." My stomach dropped. "What kind of talk?" "Some people are concerned about taking direction from someone who's younger than their own children. They're questioning whether you understand the complexities of managing client relationships and handling operational crises." I had been dreading this conversation since the day I signed the purchase agreement. "What do you think, Patricia? Do you have concerns about my ability to lead this company?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I think you have excellent instincts and a deep understanding of our business model, but I also think you need to prove yourself in ways that Marcus never had to. People gave him the benefit of the doubt because he started this company from nothing. You're going to have to earn that same respect." "How do I do that?" "By making decisions that clearly benefit the company and the employees, not just the bottom line. By showing that you care about the people who work here as much as you care about growth projections." Patricia's advice proved prophetic. Over the next several weeks, I faced a series of tests that felt designed to challenge every aspect of my leadership capabilities. The first came when our largest client, Southwest Medical Supply, threatened to terminate their contract unless we agreed to a 20% reduction in shipping rates. The account represented nearly 15% of our total revenue, and losing it would force us to lay off at least 8 employees. My initial instinct was to accept the reduced rates to preserve the relationship, but when I analyzed the numbers more carefully, I realized that the new rates would leave us with virtually no profit margin on their shipments. We'd be working, essentially, for free. I called a meeting with Southwest Medical's procurement director, armed with detailed cost breakdowns and alternative proposals. Instead of simply accepting their demands, I presented 3 options: maintaining current rates with enhanced service levels, implementing a graduated rate reduction tied to volume increases, or transitioning to a hybrid model where they handled some logistics internally while we managed specialized shipments. The negotiation lasted 4 hours and required me to defend every aspect of our pricing structure. But when it ended, we had preserved 70% of our original rates while agreeing to performance bonuses that could actually increase our revenue if we exceeded delivery targets. Word of this employees interacted with me. Less skepticism, more genuine engagement with my ideas and decisions. But the real test of my leadership came when we faced our first major operational crisis under my watch. In late April, one of our primary delivery trucks was involved in a serious accident on Interstate 10. The driver, Tom Rodriguez, was hospitalized with multiple injuries, and the truck was carrying high-value electronics shipments for 6 different clients. The cargo was scattered across a quarter-mile of highway, some of it damaged beyond salvage. I received the call at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday while studying for my international business final exam. By 11 p.m., I was at the accident scene, coordinating with police, insurance adjusters, and recovery crews.
By midnight, I was calling clients to explain the situation and arrange alternative delivery methods for undamaged goods. The next 72 hours tested every skill I'd developed in crisis management. I worked with our insurance company to expedite claims processing, arranged replacement shipments for damaged goods, and personally visited Tom Rodriguez in the hospital to ensure he received full medical coverage and job security during his recovery. But the most challenging aspect was managing the financial impact. The accident resulted in over $300,000 in damaged inventory, insurance deductibles, and replacement shipping costs. As a new business owner, I was faced with the largest financial crisis of my young career. Frank Williamson proved invaluable during this period. He guided me through the insurance claim process, helped me negotiate payment terms with affected clients, and connected me with legal counsel specializing in transportation liability. More importantly, he reminded me that how I handled this crisis would define my reputation in the industry for years to come.
Every business owner faces moments like this, he told me during one of our late-night strategy sessions. The companies that survive aren't the ones that avoid problems, they're the ones that solve problems better than anyone expects. I decided to go beyond simply meeting our legal obligations. For clients who suffered significant losses, I arranged partial compensation from company funds, even when insurance didn't require it. For Tom Rodriguez, I maintained his full salary and benefits during his 6-week recovery period. For the broader team, I implemented additional safety training and equipment upgrades to prevent similar accidents. The financial hit was substantial. Nearly $50,000 in out-of-pocket expenses that weren't covered by insurance. But the response from clients and employees was overwhelmingly positive. 3 clients actually increased their shipping volumes with us, impressed by our handling of the crisis. Several employees mentioned that they'd never worked for a company that took such comprehensive care of its people. By summer, I had settled into a rhythm as CEO that balanced daily operations with longer-term strategic planning. My grades at ASU remained strong. I was determined to honor my commitment to complete my degree, but the real education was happening at DDS. Every day brought new challenges that tested different aspects of business leadership. Negotiating vendor contracts taught me about supply chain economics. Mediating employee disputes honed my conflict resolution skills. Analyzing market trends and competitor strategies deepened my understanding of strategic positioning. The most significant growth opportunity came when I decided to pursue my first major expansion initiative. DDS had always focused on ground transportation within Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, but I had identified a significant opportunity in specialized logistics for e-commerce businesses, particularly companies that needed temperature-controlled shipping for products like cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and gourmet foods. The expansion would require substantial capital investment in refrigerated vehicles and climate-controlled warehouse space. It would also mean entering a more competitive market segment with higher service standards and tighter profit margins. My investor partners were initially skeptical. During our quarterly board meeting, they questioned whether the expansion was premature, given my limited experience and the recent financial impact of the truck accident. "Rebecca," said James Morrison, one of the senior investors, "you've done excellent work stabilizing operations and improving client relationships, but expansion into specialized logistics is a significant strategic shift. Are you certain this is the right time?" I had prepared extensively for this question. I presented detailed market research showing the rapid growth in e-commerce businesses requiring specialized shipping services. I outlined our competitive advantages, including our existing client relationships and operational expertise. Most importantly, I demonstrated how the expansion would diversify our revenue streams and reduce our dependence on any single market segment. The way I see it, we can either wait for competitors to establish dominance in this market segment, or we can position ourselves as the regional leader in specialized logistics services. Frank leaned forward in his chair. "What's your timeline for implementation?"
18 months for full operational capability. We'd start with temperature-controlled delivery services using leased vehicles, then gradually invest in owned assets as revenue grows. The discussion continued for another hour, with board members challenging various aspects of my proposal. But when the vote was called, they approved the expansion plan unanimously. As I left that board meeting, I realized something had fundamentally changed in how I viewed my role at DDS. I was no longer the young woman trying to prove she deserved to own a business. I was a CEO making strategic decisions about the future of a company that employed nearly 50 people and served hundreds of clients. The transition hadn't been easy, and I knew more challenges lay ahead. But for the first time since buying the company, I felt genuinely confident that I belonged in the CEO's office. That evening, I called Charlotte to share the news about the board's approval of my expansion plan. She was in Los Angeles preparing for pilot season auditions, but she listened enthusiastically as I described my vision for growing DDS into a regional leader in specialized logistics. "I have to admit," she said when I finished, "when you first told us about buying the company, I thought you were crazy. But listening to you talk about business strategy and market positioning, you sound like you were born to do this." "It doesn't feel like something I was born to do," I replied honestly. "It feels like something I chose to become good at." "Maybe that's even better," Charlotte said. "Being naturally talented at something is one thing, but deciding to master something because you believe in it, that takes a different kind of courage." After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the warehouse floor where night shift employees were loading trucks for tomorrow's deliveries. 6 months ago, I was a college student with an impossible dream. Now I was responsible for the livelihoods of these workers, the satisfaction of hundreds of clients, and the growth of a multi-million-dollar business.
The weight of that responsibility should have been overwhelming. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I had spent years being dismissed as the practical twin, the sensible one, the person who colored inside the lines. But building a business, I was learning, required exactly those qualities. Success came from careful planning, methodical execution, and the patience to build something lasting rather than something flashy. For the first time in my life, being practical felt like a superpower rather than a limitation. 18 months after my successful board presentation for the specialized logistics expansion, Dynamic Distribution Solutions had transformed into something I barely recognized from the company I'd purchased 3 years earlier. Our temperature-controlled delivery division was generating $2 million annually, we'd opened satellite offices in Las Vegas and Albuquerque, and our employee count had grown to 93 people across 4 states. But success brought unexpected challenges that business school had never prepared me for. The morning that would change everything started with what should have been a routine client meeting. I was sitting in the conference room at Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals, our largest temperature-controlled shipping client, expecting to discuss expanding our service contract. Instead, their chief procurement officer delivered news that made my stomach drop. "Rebecca, we've enjoyed working with Dynamic Distribution Solutions, but we've received an offer from Nationwide Logistics that we can't ignore. They're proposing to handle all our shipping needs at 30% below your current rates." Nationwide Logistics was one of the largest shipping companies in the country, with the resources to operate at losses in specific markets while they drove out local competitors. I had been dreading this moment since we'd started gaining market share in specialized logistics. 30% is below our cost structure, I said carefully. "Are you certain they can maintain service quality at those rates?" "Their proposal includes guaranteed delivery times and full temperature monitoring. Frankly, the savings would allow us to expand our operations significantly." I left that meeting knowing that losing Pinnacle would create a domino effect. Other clients would demand similar rate reductions, and we'd be forced to choose between profitability and market share. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with my management team. Patricia Valdez, now our vice president of operations, had become my most trusted advisor over the past 2 years. Tom Rodriguez, who had returned to work after his accident and been promoted to safety director, brought a driver's perspective to strategic decisions. Sarah Chen, our new chief financial officer, had joined us 6 months earlier from a Fortune 500 company.
Nationwide is trying to push us out of the specialized logistics market, I explained to the group. They're bidding contracts at rates that would be unprofitable for any company our size. How long can they sustain losses like that? Tom asked. Sarah pulled up financial data on her laptop. Based on their corporate filings, probably 18 to 24 months, long enough to force smaller competitors out of business. So what are our options? Patricia asked. I had been wrestling with this question all day. We could try to match their rates and hope they give up before we run out of cash. We could focus on clients who value service quality over price. Or, I paused, knowing that what I was about to suggest would sound crazy. Or we could go on the offensive. The room was quiet for a moment before Sarah spoke up. What do you mean by offensive? I mean, we could expand aggressively into markets where Nationwide is vulnerable, force them to defend multiple territories instead of just attacking ours. Patricia raised an eyebrow. That would require significant capital investment. Which brings me to something I've been considering for months. There's an acquisition opportunity that could change our entire competitive position. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying for weeks, but hadn't shared with anyone. Southwest Logistics Solutions is going up for sale again. The silence that followed was different from the usual pause during strategic discussions. This was the silence of people trying to process information that seemed too significant to be real. Southwest Logistics Solutions, Frank Sullivan's company, Patricia asked. The one your parents wanted to buy 6 years ago. The same one. Sullivan is finally retiring for real this time, and he's looking for a buyer who will preserve the company culture he's built. Tom leaned forward. How big is Southwest Logistics Solutions compared to us? Revenue of $8.4 million annually, 215 employees, contracts with every major medical distributor in Arizona and Nevada. Combined with DDS, we'd be generating over $15 million in annual revenue. Sarah was already calculating numbers on her laptop. What's the asking price? $4.6 million, but Sarah, this isn't just about the numbers. SLS has something we can't build quickly enough to compete with Nationwide. Which is? Scale. Market presence. Long-term contracts with clients who value relationships over price. If we acquire SLS, we become large enough to weather Nationwide's price war while maintaining profitability in markets they can't afford to attack. The discussion continued for 2 hours, with my team challenging every aspect of the potential acquisition. By the end of the meeting, we had identified risks, opportunities, and the preliminary steps needed to evaluate the deal seriously. But I knew the real challenge wouldn't be financial or strategic. It would be emotional. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for what had become our weekly dinner tradition. The dynamic had evolved significantly over the past 3 years. Instead of Charlotte being the center of attention, our conversations now revolved around business strategy, industry trends, and my experiences as CEO. Charlotte was visiting from Los Angeles, where her career had finally gained real momentum. She'd landed a series regular role on a cable drama that was getting critical acclamation and award consideration. For the first time in our lives, we were both achieving success in our chosen fields. You look like you have something important to discuss, Mom said as we sat down to dinner. I do. I'm considering acquiring another company. Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Another expansion? Southwest Logistics Solutions. The silence that followed was profound. Charlotte looked confused, but my parents' faces reflected a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully interpret. Southwest Logistics Solutions, Dad repeated slowly. Frank Sullivan's company. The one you wanted to buy 6 years ago. The same one. Mom set down her water glass carefully. Rebecca, do you realize what you're saying? I'm saying that the company you and Dad dreamed of owning is available for purchase, and I'm in a position to acquire it. Charlotte looked between our parents and me. I'm missing something here. What's the significance of this particular company?
Dad explained their history with Southwest Logistics Solutions, the months of planning, the disappointment when financing fell through, the dreams that had been abandoned when Frank Sullivan decided not to sell. So Rebecca is about to buy the exact company you always wanted, Charlotte summarized. Not just buy it, I corrected. merge it with dynamic distribution solutions to create the largest independent logistics company in the Southwest. The dinner conversation continued with my parents asking detailed questions about the acquisition strategy, financing requirements, and integration challenges. Their business knowledge had deepened significantly over the past 3 years as they followed my company's growth. "How do you feel about this opportunity?" Mom asked as we were cleaning up. "Excited about the strategic potential, nervous about the complexity, but also I keep thinking about how disappointed you both were when the deal fell through 6 years ago." Dad stopped drying dishes and turned to face me. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. The disappointment we felt wasn't really about losing a business opportunity. It was about realizing we weren't ready for something we thought we wanted." "What do you mean?" "We thought we wanted to own a logistics company, but we didn't really understand what that meant. We were attracted to the idea of being entrepreneurs, not the reality of managing operations, employees, and clients." Mom nodded. "You, on the other hand, have spent years learning exactly what it means to run a logistics company. You've earned the right to make this acquisition through knowledge, experience, and proven success." "Are you saying you're not disappointed that I might accomplish something you couldn't?" "Disappointed?" Dad laughed. "Rebecca, we're proud beyond words. You didn't just accidentally stumble into an opportunity. You systematically built the expertise and relationships necessary to make it happen." Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Can I say something as the family member who's been watching this from the outside?" We all turned to look at her. "Becca, 6 years ago, when Mom and Dad were talking about buying that company, you were asking questions that none of us understood. You were already thinking like a business owner before you even knew that's what you wanted to become." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I used to think you were just being your usual methodical self, analyzing everything to death. But you were actually preparing for something none of us could see coming." The weekend was spent in detailed preparation for what would be the most complex business negotiation of my career. I worked with Frank Williamson and my other board members to develop an acquisition strategy that would satisfy both our investors and Southwest Logistics Solutions stakeholders. Frank had maintained his relationship with Frank Sullivan over the years, which proved invaluable in facilitating initial discussions. When Sullivan learned that the potential buyer was the young woman who had impressed him years earlier at a family dinner, he agreed to expedited due diligence procedures. The first formal meeting took place at Southwest Logistics Solutions headquarters on a Tuesday morning in late October. The building was larger and more sophisticated than DDS's facility, with automated sorting systems and a fleet of specialized vehicles that represented millions of dollars in capital investment. Sullivan greeted me in the lobby with a smile that suggested he remembered our previous encounter more clearly than I had expected. "Rebecca Martinez, I have to admit, when Frank Williamson told me you were interested in acquiring SLS, my first thought was about that dinner conversation we had years ago. You asked better questions about logistics operations than most industry veterans. I've learned a lot since then." "So I've heard. Your reputation in the industry has grown considerably over the past 3 years. Clients speak very highly of Dynamic Distribution Solutions' service quality and reliability." The tour of SLS's operations was both impressive and intimidating. Their warehouse management systems were more advanced than anything we had at DDS. Their client relationships included contracts with medical distributors that generated millions in annual revenue. Their employee base included specialists in pharmaceutical logistics, hazardous materials handling, and regulatory compliance. But what struck me most was the company culture Sullivan had built. Employees seemed genuinely engaged with their work. Turnover rates were low, and there was an obvious pride in being part of an organization that prioritized service quality over profit maximization. "What matters most to you in selecting a buyer?" I asked Sullivan as we concluded the facility tour. "Preserving what we've built here. I don't want to sell to a corporation that will cut costs by laying off employees or reducing service standards.
I want SLS to continue being the kind of company where people are proud to work. What if I told you that maintaining company culture and employee retention are among my highest priorities? I'd ask you to prove it. Over the next 4 weeks, I engaged in the most thorough due diligence process of my career. I interviewed key employees, analyzed financial statements going back 5 years, and assessed every aspect of SLS's operations. My investor partners brought in outside consultants to verify my findings and provide independent valuations. The financial analysis confirmed what Sullivan had represented. SLS was profitable, growing, and positioned for continued success in specialized logistics markets. The asking price of $4.6 million was actually conservative based on revenue multiples in the industry. But the real value wasn't in the financial statements. It was in the operational capabilities and market relationships that would take years to build from scratch. The acquisition financing proved more complex than my original purchase of DDS. This time, I needed a combination of bank loans, investor capital, and seller financing to structure a deal that worked for all parties. The breakthrough came when Sullivan proposed a creative financing structure that would allow him to maintain a small equity stake in the combined company while providing seller financing for a portion of the purchase price. He explained during one of our negotiation sessions, "I've spent 30 years building this company. I'd like to remain involved as an advisor while you handle day-to-day operations." The proposal was attractive for multiple reasons. Sullivan's continued involvement would ease the transition for employees and clients, his industry expertise would be valuable as we integrated the two companies, and the seller financing would reduce our immediate capital requirements. After 6 weeks of negotiation, we reached an agreement that satisfied all stakeholders. I would acquire controlling interest in Southwest Logistics Solutions for $4.6 million, with Sullivan retaining a 15% equity stake and a 3-year consulting contract. The news of the pending acquisition spread quickly through both companies and the broader logistics industry. Trade publications ran articles about the merger, highlighting the strategic significance of combining two successful regional companies.
But the most meaningful response came from employees at both organizations. Instead of the uncertainty and resistance I had feared, there was genuine excitement about the opportunities that a larger, more capable company could provide. Patricia Valdez, who would become Chief Operating Officer of the merged entity, summarized the sentiment perfectly. This isn't about one company taking over another. This is about creating something bigger and better than either company could become alone. The closing ceremony took place on a Friday morning in December, exactly 4 years after I had first called Frank Williamson asking for advice about purchasing a logistics company. The conference room was filled with attorneys, accountants, and executives from both organizations. When I signed the final documents that made me the majority owner of Southwest Logistics Solutions, I became the CEO of a company that employed over 300 people and generated more than $15 million in annual revenue. But the moment that meant the most came later that afternoon when I addressed the combined workforce at a company-wide meeting. 4 years ago, I began, speaking to a room filled with drivers, warehouse workers, dispatchers, and managers from both companies. I was a college student with an impossible dream. I wanted to own a logistics company despite having no business experience, no capital, and no industry connections. I looked out at faces that represented decades of combined experience in the logistics industry. What I did have was a belief that methodical thinking, careful planning, and relentless execution could overcome almost any obstacle. I also had the support of mentors who were willing to invest in someone young enough to be their daughter. Today, we're not just two separate companies anymore. We're a single organization with the resources, expertise, and geographic coverage to compete with anyone in our industry. More importantly, we're a company built on the principle that excellent service comes from taking care of our people and our clients. The applause that followed was enthusiastic and sustained. But more importantly, I could see in their faces the same excitement about possibilities that I had felt 4 years earlier when I first walked into Dynamic Distribution Solutions. That evening, My family gathered at my parents' house for a celebration dinner that brought together everyone who had been part of my journey. Marcus Chen flew in from California, where his consulting business was thriving. Frank Williamson attended with his wife, along with my other investor partners. But the most meaningful moment came when Charlotte raised her glass for a toast. 4 years ago, she said, my sister bought a logistics company that everyone thought was too big a risk for someone her age. Tonight, she's the CEO of the largest independent logistics company in the Southwest. She paused, looking directly at me. But what impresses me most isn't the business success. It's watching Becca discover that all the qualities that made her feel different, being practical, methodical, detail-oriented, were actually the exact qualities she needed to build something extraordinary. To Rebecca, she continued, who proved that being the sensible twin isn't a limitation, it's a superpower. As the evening continued, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had gone from being the overlooked twin to the CEO of a company that represented everything my family had once dreamed about achieving. But the most important transformation wasn't professional. It was personal. I had finally stopped measuring my worth against other people's achievements and started building my own definition of success. The practical, methodical, supposedly boring twin had created a business that employed hundreds of people, served thousands of clients, and generated millions of dollars in revenue. More importantly, I had discovered that there was extraordinary power in ordinary virtues, like persistence, careful planning, and attention to detail. 6 months later, as I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports that showed the successful integration of both companies, I received a call that brought my story full circle in the most unexpected way. Rebecca, this is Frank Sullivan. I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition, Frank? There's a logistics company in Colorado that's looking for a buyer. The owner is retiring, and he's specifically looking for someone with your track record in acquisition and integration. I smiled, realizing that the journey I had thought was ending was actually just beginning. Tell me more. As Frank described the opportunity, I understood that the skills I had developed over the past 4 years, strategic thinking, financial analysis, operational management, and team leadership, were transferable to challenges far beyond my original imagination. I was no longer the college student who had stumbled into an impossible dream. I was an experienced CEO with a proven track record of turning opportunities into success. The practical twin had become someone who could see possibilities where others saw only problems, who could build solutions where others saw only obstacles. And I was just getting started.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.